All right. Hey, everybody, up front. I know you can't hear me, but I'm going to talk real loud. All right. I'm Mark Perry. I'm supposed to be running the meeting. So, thank you for coming today at the Rivers Coalition. We've got a lot of interesting stuff on the agenda, great presentation. Dr. Sullivan's here, and we appreciate you coming out today and going through kind of a really good full list of stuff, and all of us members representing delegates. So first thing to do, help me stand and let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Fantastic, wonderful. Now I'm going to ask all of us as members, associate members of the Rivers Coalition, to stand again, and then we're going to kind of go down the rows and introduce ourselves. If you're just members of the public or attending, thanks for coming, but if you're a member of the Rivers Coalition, please just stand up and we'll start up here in the front, and we'll kind of go back to the back and report attending.
Tom Blasing, Lighthouse Community Homeowners. Jim Harder, Stewart Flywater. Hi, Dave Derenbacher, Martin County Realtor, Trust. Mike Connor, Board of Directors, Rivers Coalition. Kenny Hinkle, River Wave.
Alan Herskowitz, Sailfish Point, POA.
Blair Wickstrom, Florida Sportsman Magazine. Greg Braun, Guardians of Martin County.
Glenn Killis, Stewart Rod and Reel Club.
Back over here, Paul.
Paul Gray, out of Florida.
Walter Deaver, Martin County League of Women Voters.
Jackie Transiger, Martin County Conservation Alliance.
Jeanette Hartzell, League of Women Voters, St. Lucie County.
Hi, Jeanette. Oh,
Mike
cell phone.
Myers, Windhammer Condominium.
Oh, $50. Going to the Rivers Coalition donation.
Annie Potts, Red Coast Rowing Club.
Thank you, Annie.
Joanne Swan, St. Lucie Sailing Club.
Hi, Joanne.
Paul Laura, Hutchinson Island Preservation Initiative.
Hi, Paul.
Regina Wood, Martin County, Florida Native Plant Society.
Hi, Regina.
Jim Wharton, Harbor Ridge Yacht Club.
Hi, Jim. Over here,
Daryl Brown, Palm Cove Yacht Club.
Charles Grandy, President's Council of Hutchinson Island.
and Mark Perry, Florida Oceanographic Society. So great, glad you all are here today, and we have 25 members attending. Oh, our little Florida sun trip. What we're going to do is we also recognize a member who passed away. It was Mark Boston of the Nettles Island Community Action Association. Mark Boston was a real active member. You might recall him being here from time to time and being very active, particularly with congressional issues and things, and wanting to get people involved in action involved. And so we're sad to say that Mark passed away this past week. And Barbara, any updates on that for coming, perhaps we could circulate?
No, Charles was a friend of his. Do you want to say any
Charles.
more about him?
Mark was especially active out on the island and beachfront and lagoon-related issues, and he is missed on that.
Yeah, very much. The other thing is we're having a new member today. We have a new member of the estuary of North River Shores. Is anybody from the
Yes,
estuary? here?
Iris. Daryl.
Come on up, come on up. So the Estuary of North River Shores Community Association has submitted their letters to the board. They submitted the application, which we found acceptable and all in order.
Well, I'm not the voting member, I'm just a...
Okay.
You can get in the picture.
Well, we're going to introduce somebody
Are you Wayne Smith? Are you
from
Wayne
the
Smith?
estuary.
I'm sorry, I'm from the estuary, I've been coming for the last 2 years, but haven't become a voting member yet.
Come on
up.
So we're going to welcome them, and do I have anybody who's objecting to having a new member?
No.
Thank you. So we'll take that's vote. So let me introduce you. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Good morning, thank you for having me. I'm from the condo section of the North River Shores out at the estuary. We are a small community, about 120 units. that because we are a riverfront community, that we need to be concerned with the health of the river that we so enjoy. So we are here today to become a member. Bravo.
So,
I'll make a motion that we accept them.
so moved, seconded, and all those in favor? Say
Aye.
All opposed? None. Great. How many, 106 now?
106.
Wow.
106?
Just keep growing and growing. It's amazing at the end of this letter. Just another quick comment before we get started. The board did look at a draft, and Barbara printed some out of this Lake Okeechobee operational change statement. And please read through this. We're going to be talking about it and hopefully doing a resolution at our January meeting. Remember, we don't have a meeting in December. So there's no meeting in December. Happy holidays. We're going to be having a meeting in January. The draft statement here is about the operational change that can occur. And we looked over some thoughts and ideas about keeping that operation rules within the scope of the Lake Okeechobee operating system operating manual down in the third paragraph there, and about how that can be implemented to even the current operational schedule. So if you look at the current lake, here's the graph of the current lake, and you see in blue there basically this year, of what happened this year. And you can see the track of the blue in the summer months when it reached its low of just over 11 feet. It was just under 11 feet. And that followed that black line. See that heavy black line below the blue dip down there in June? Well, that's kind of the ideal way to kind of, within the operating schedule, the Corps had that flexibility to be able to operate down with a lower lake level and then allow it to come back up during this dry period. So that target has always been there to get the lake at that low point during June 1st. Why? Because it's hurricane season starts and all those tropical storms bring huge amounts of rain. And all those squiggly lines on the graph show you that sometimes in September or so we get huge tropical storm events that drop a lot of rain, and as Paul could testify, raises the lake 2, maybe 3 feet in a really short time. So having the lake low during that time period down to June 1st has always been an operational ban. What we're suggesting here is that it continue to be, and particularly in LOSUM, that the Corps build that into the LOSUM process and also maintain that flexibility. So this will be sent out. There are handouts, but we'll put it on the website and you can review it. With your groups, come back and we'll talk about it in January. Moving right on to our current presentation, if you recall, and back in May of last year, oh, I have it here somewhere. I know I've got a bunch of paper here, but I did have, oh, here it is, our letter that we sent as a Rivers Coalition to Dr. Shirley Gordon and Dr. Jim Sullivan. And this was in regard to FAU Harbor Branch and the other Florida Atlantic University doing engaging communities addressing the public health impacts of harmful algae blooms. And we sent a letter of support for that work that was going to be done back in May of this year. Since then, of course, we know Dr. Sullivan has been a member of the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. They have a website and have submitted their kind of first consensus document about recommendations for the blue-green algae. I encourage you to go to the Blue-Green Algae Task Force website and read about that. And Dr. Sullivan's here today to talk a little bit about that. I do want to recognize, before we introduce him, get started, some public officials. Some are sitting at the dais where they usually sit up here. For the City of Stuart, we have Mayor Becky Bruner and, of course, Commissioner Mayor Matheson. Thank you for hosting us here. I noticed that we didn't have another, do we have any other elected officials? I'm not sure if we did. Commissioners or, yes?
Representing Congressman Mast.
Okay, John Haddock's representing Congressman Mast, and we even have a candidate, some candidates are going to start showing up in the room. This person, Ozzy.
Oz Vasquez.
Vasquez at the back there'll be candidates coming forward, I'm sure, and you would maybe want to talk to them later. Okay, great. So here we are. We're going to introduce, appreciate putting the bio in the Force newsletter. I'm not going to go further into that introduction, but Please help me welcome Dr. Jim Sullivan.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you all for having me here. This is great. As Mark said, I'm going to talk about a little bit about what the Blue-Green Algal Task Force has been doing. But before I do that, if anyone's seen me speak before, I normally talk a little bit about what harmful algal blooms are. I mean, it's important in Florida that we understand, and that's why the task force was formed. That's why the Red Tide Task Force was also reconstituted and formed. We have an issue with it. And this is what this slide basically says. Florida has an algae problem, and specifically harmful algal blooms. And these are just headlines that I pulled from last year. This is what we do not want to see, obviously, as people that live in Florida. So what are harmful algal blooms? I hope I'm talking to a very educated audience. You probably don't need to hear this, but I mean, they're just simply occurrences of phytoplankton that cause some kind of negative ecosystem or human impact. And these are various photos of different harmful algal blooms, most of these from Florida, except for this one. This is where they got their original name from Red Tide. The original blooms, we didn't have all these other ones. I mean, it's a somewhat new phenomenon. But some of the original blooms we had were an algae that had this very red pigment to it, so it discolored the water red, thus the red tide. But we have, and all the rest of these from Florida, green tide, that's Florida's red tide there, brown tide, even yellow tide for that matter, where you just get these massive amounts of algae that discolor the water. This is pretty obvious. The one thing I should say, when you go to see water that looks nice and blue and you're like, oh, that's clean water, it's good, there can be harmful algal blooms with no discoloration of water. These are just ones where they're either at the surface or there's a lot of them so you can actually see it. But they can be in almost any water body. It's important to remember that. So what are phytoplankton? Not everyone's a phytoplankton biologist, but they're just microscopic plants. That's all you have to know. They behave pretty much just like plants. And we call them algae. But the one thing that you can see here is a movie of one particular phytoplankton that actually causes harmful algal blooms on the west coast of the United States. They have a lot of specialized adaptations. So this one can swim. A lot of times when you see those, a bunch of algae at the surface, it's because it's one of these types that can actually swim right up to the surface to get light. So Florida's red tide, when it discolors the water on the surface, creates that red color. It's because all these algae swam to the surface. Blue-green algae they don't swim, they're not modal like this one is, but they do create little gas bubbles inside their colonies that allows them to float to the surface. And they can control those gas vesicles or bubbles during the day so that they can collapse them and then sink back down at night to get nutrients. So they're not always at the surface. They can get mixed in by wind as well. But they're not active swimmers like this. Unfortunately, one of the other adaptations that phytoplankton have is they can produce toxin. This is what is a problem for us in the environment. So how do these phytoplankton and harmful algal blooms grow? It's pretty straightforward. Like I said, they're plants, so like all plants, they need three things to grow, or three main conditions. The first is they need optimal light, and higher light promotes faster growth. Up to a point, but most of the time, the higher the light, the faster they're going to grow. They need an optimal temperature range. Most algae and most harmful algae like warmer temperatures. The warmer the warmer gets, the faster they grow. That's a good rule of thumb. And they also need nutrients, just like any other plant. They need phosphorus, they need nitrogen, helps them grow. The more nutrients they have, the more of algae you get, more biomass. That just means how much is there. So how are they actually harmful? I think everyone knows the top. They know these can produce toxin, which can hurt you. It can hurt animals, pets, you name it, if you get exposed to it. There are a ton of different toxins these algae make. That's why it's not just one solution. Depending on the algae that's there, there's going to be a different toxin that has a different effect, be a neurotoxin or a liver toxin that you have to be aware of. But they can also be dangerous through high biomass. There's just a lot of it in the water. When this sinks to the bottom and rots, it takes the oxygen out of the water. You get hypoxia and anoxia, you get a fish kill. That's generally what goes. You also get shading. None of the light the light that's coming down from above can really get through this, so that the bottom of the lagoon or the bottom of the ocean will be effectively dark, because all the light's being absorbed by the algae on the surface. If you have seagrass beds, which are a really important part of our ecology, this is what kills seagrass. They get shaded out and they die. So even though the thing might not be toxic, it's still killing something or hurting the environment. Algae can cause mechanical damage. They produce mucus and surfactants that can actually hurt seabirds. Some of the mucus they create can clog up the feeding apparatus of shellfish, so they can kill oysters and mussels. They can also have serrations on their actual cells, cell walls. So some of these are made of a type of quartz, actually. They make a glass. And they can be very sharp, and they can cut the gills of fish, which can essentially end up with death that way, or fish kill that way. And obviously economics. That's pretty obvious. Anyone here who does tourism or recreates, you're not going to go in water like this, nor are you going to want to sell your house if this is what's like behind it every day in the water in front of your property. So it affects a lot of different things, and it can close fisheries. These are all the current hab threats in South Florida, and this is why I say it's important that you get educated on this. It's not just blue-green algae, and it's not just Florida's red tide. There are a lot of different harmful algae out there, many of which are growing actively right now, and they grow, they're seasonal. Sometimes they're out there all the time, sometimes they go up and down depending on the season. The two big ones is Carenia, that's Florida's red tide, Carenia brevis, and you can see the blue-green algae is mostly associated with Lake Okeechobee, but if you notice, I put this green circle around the whole state. It's in most of our larger freshwater lakes and ponds, particularly up in this area. There's some persistent toxic blue-green algae in these waters. So it's not just a Lake Okeechobee problem, it's in most freshwater. Whether or not it creates a big bloom, that's a problem, well, we just have to monitor and find out. Those two everyone hears about, but if you look at the lagoon, there's a whole bunch of different things going on. There's been brown tide up in the northern Indian Lagoon, which caused a large fish kill in 2016. Pyridinium produces saxitoxin, which is a dangerous neurotoxin that's pretty persistent in the Banana River. During the summertime, this new threat we're seeing in the lagoon now is a diatom called Pseudonychia, makes another neurotoxin called domoic acid. You would not know this is in the water. This is one of these cases where it does not discolor the water, it does not come to the surface, it generally sits down at depth. You would not know it's there, but it is there. So just be aware, there's a lot of different things going on in the state that don't make the news. So this isn't just a problem in Florida. I say this every time, just to, don't feel bad that you live in Florida. This is pretty much happening everywhere, and it's happening worldwide. It's not just a United States problem either. So worldwide, these blooms are increasing not only where we see them, but in the type, the frequency, how often they occur, how long they last, and how severe they are to the environment, economy, everything else. And if you look at 1972, this heat map here, essentially, each one of the different symbols is a different type of harmful algal bloom, and you can see, well, they were sporadic around the United States, it wasn't too bad. This is what it's like now, and these are just major harmful algal blooms. And the two things you notice, well, there's a lot more of this occurring all around the United States, and we didn't even fill in the middle with all the different blue-green algae blooms we have in the United States. But all the different types that occur now, it's not just a couple species, it's a whole bunch of species that are creating harmful algal blooms. And unfortunately, we're one of the most impacted states in the US. But we can lead this. I mean, this is a bad thing, but in a way it's a good thing. Florida can become a leader for the rest of the United States and the world on how we mitigate, control, and deal with these algal problems. So why are these HAB events increasing? That would be the first question everyone asks when they see that graph. It's pretty simple. Nutrient pollution, probably the number one reason, what we call eutrophication. The nutrients that we put into our watersheds fertilize the water. It's like fertilizing your lawn or fertilizing crops. These plants like to be fertilized and grow. The nutrient sustains the blooms and it increases how many are there. So it's pretty detrimental. Global warming and climate change is also a pretty big part of it. The warming of our waters is increasing the growth ranges of where these can occur. They can keep on getting further and further north because it's warmer and warmer as we go. It increases their growth rates. Remember I told you that? Warmer water, faster growth rates. but it also extends their growing seasons. So when it might have got cold before and knocked them down because they don't grow as well in cold water, it stays warmer longer at the beginning of seasons and at the end of seasons. Well, the algae can now grow for a longer part of the year. Changing precipitation from climate change, we get more extreme events, storms, a lot of more rainfall. That increases runoff, almost always. Well, what does runoff bring into the watershed? Nutrients. So it exasperates number one. And the last is, as humans, we modify the ecosystem a lot. I don't have time to go into this in great detail, but our change in land use practices, how we manage our water, you were just talking about how we deal with Lake Okeechobee. It's a water management issue. We can increase runoff by development, dredging. There's many ways that humans are changing the ecosystem. A lot of them feed back, unfortunately, to harmful algal blooms and get them going even worse. All right, so now the hopefully good part. What is the state doing? So we have a problem. I think it's pretty clear. Governor DeSantis did name a task force. I was appointed to be on this task force. I was also appointed by Senate President Galvano to serve on the Florida Red Tide Mitigation and Technology Development Initiation Advisory Council. That does not lend itself to a good acronym. But I get to deal with both the red tide issue and the blue-green algal issue. So the Blue-Green Algal Task Force, as Mark was saying, you should go check out the website. It's kept pretty up to date. I mean, they put all the meeting notes are there. You can see what information we get. I think the Florida, what's it called, the Florida Channel, they record every one of the meetings. They have to be open to the public. It's under sunshine law. So you can see everything we see, and you can see us deliberate and talk about it. Nothing is done behind doors or without the public's knowledge. The mission of the Blue-Green Algal Task Force is pretty simple. It's a large problem, but to guide and expedite improvements in regulatory and policy structure to improve degraded water bodies. I mean, we have a lot of issues, and ultimately to stop the algal bloom problem, and specifically the blue-green algal bloom problem. But even though it's the Blue-Green Algal Task Force, what we're doing on that task force is going to affect a lot of these other blooms. If we clean up our water, it affects everything. So it's not just for blue-green algae. There's 5 members on the task force right now. I'm on it, Evelyn Geiser, Wendy Graham, Mike Parsons, Valerie Paul from the Smithsonian, right up the road. And the chief science officer, Tom Frazier, acts as chair. So he's always there and he organizes the meetings for us. So the Blue-Green Algal Task Force has looked at 2 primary strategies to address the blue-green algal problem we have in the state. And really, there's only 2 things we can do. We can prevent them from happening, or we can mitigate them when they do occur. And there's not many other choices. And of course, we want to do both of these, but if you had to say, okay, where should we put most of our effort? Where should we really concentrate? I think most of the task force is in agreement that it should be in prevention. We want to stop them from happening. We don't want to keep on cleaning up messes. We actually want to stop them from happening and clean up the water that's causing it to happen. So, right. See, I'm preaching to the choir. So, how are we going to stop? I mean, this is what we're talking. How do we stop them from growing? Again, there's simple plants, light, temperature, nutrients. Well, what do you think? Are we going to stop the sun? No. Are we going to stop global warming? Are we going to stop it from being a nice warm state? No. This is it. This is our only real toolbox to deal with this. Yes, we want to combat climate change, but the task force isn't going to do that on its own. This is where we have to put our energy. We have to stop nutrient pollution, plain and simple. So, I'm sure everyone here knows this, but when I say nutrient pollution, what do I mean? We're basically talking about nitrogen and phosphorus getting into the water. Algae need a whole bunch of other micronutrients like iron and magnesium, but they're all trace amounts, and we don't have to really regulate them. But these 2 we do. We do have to start dealing with. There are a lot of sources of nutrient pollution in Florida. as everyone here is probably aware of. There are septic systems. We have agricultural operations that use biosolids and other fertilizers, which then maybe run off into the watershed. Urban stormwater runoff from STSs and use of residential fertilizers, which also can overrun and get into the watershed. Sewer overflows from treatment plants or failing infrastructure pipes. I mean, we still have wooden, this was talked out at the Harbor Branch Blueprint Animal Task Force. We still have delivery pipes that are made out of wood. They leach. During storms, treatment plants lose power. They dump freely at that point. There are a lot of issues. Legacy nutrients, Lake Okeechobee, there's a lot of nutrients sitting there. You know, there's other issues out there. The use of herbicides, Roundup, glyphosate.
Postpone, restart.
Yeah, don't.
Oh, thank you. Oh, rewind in like
Might want to go a little bit longer.
8 hours. Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. No problem.
That was
I've had
that was a
much worse.
city.
How long these slides have been up there? I think, as everyone's probably aware of, so you look at this list and it's like, okay, what do we? Most people say, okay, we got to prioritize. We got to go after septic. So we need septic to sewer conversion. Or no, it's ag. We got to go after ag, biosolids. That's the problem. The issue is, and you really, this has got hammered into our heads as we've heard testimony from different groups on the task force. And I think it's, you know, it's not like I'm saying something that's unusual or new, but the importance of all these different sources, it really depends on the location of the watershed. You can't say, well, if we just get rid of all the septic systems, Florida will be great. It's like, no, it's not like that. Or if we just stop agriculture from using biosolids, oh, it's all gonna be fine. No, it's not going to be. And an example is, if we look at the Lake Okeechobee BMAP, and it's small, but it shows you where different land use areas are in this BMAP. But if you just look at where the estimates are for the total phosphorus load from different sources in the Lake Okeechobee BMAP, and since the task force talks a lot about Lake Okeechobee, I'll just show this as an example. In this case, agriculture is probably responsible for somewhere around 80% of the nutrient pollution that's going into the lake. You know, I mean, I don't know how accurate the numbers are, but it's probably somewhere up there. So in this case, agriculture is something we should concentrate on. But if we went out to the St. Lucie estuary and looked around there, some of that probably is septic instead. And doing an agricultural, you know, enforcement, it might not have that much power there. So we have to hit all this stuff. You just can't get fixated on one problem. It's like, oh, this is who we're going after. It's like, no, we have to deal with all of them. Then you understand the scope of what the task force is trying to deal with. I mean, every area we look at in the state you have to look at these charts and start to figure out where the priority is to go after. So it's a substantial issue. So what have we currently done, and what have I seen since I've been on the task force? Well, we have multiple task forces, as I said. There's 3 of them right now that are going on, including the Blue-Red Animal Task Force. And we're starting to provide science-based recommendations on policy, management, response, and regulations. I mean, we're trying to do this as fast as we can to get it to the legislature. But here's what we, as scientists, we think needs to be done. The state right now is considering the EPA guidelines for toxin warnings and closures, which would be a good thing. The state is definitely starting to increase HAB and toxin testing and monitoring, which is a really good thing. You need to know what's there and when it's there. I've seen definitely an increased cooperation between agencies, which is great. The Department of Health has now started investing in HAB and human health studies, which I have advocated for ad nauseum. The DEP is investing in need and science and technology, mitigation technology. I mean, we can't forget about that. If we can clean up what's there, that's a good thing too. And there's definitely been increased public education outreach, and we're starting to get a bit better warnings posted when things are out there. So this is pretty promising for a pretty short period, what's going on. As Mark said, as a task force, we released our first set of recommendations. We tried to do it as quickly as we could. It's just a consensus document. It's really broad in its outline because we had to kind of cover, as you just saw, a lot of different things at once. It is not the end of what the task force is doing. Now we're going to take individual topics and give much more detailed recommendations to the legislature and the governor. But the governor says he's mostly going to follow what we've currently put up there. And if you want to see the consensus document, it is online on the website of the task force. As far as what they're trying to get out to people, I mean, this is really good. All these websites are now available to the public, which is great. So there's an algal bloom sampling status where you can see where all the different sampling the state and different agencies are doing and how much toxin's there, what algae's there. A really good resource. They now have the weekly blue-green algal bloom update, which shows you where the bloom is in Lake Okeechobee and other larger water bodies. Really good resource. We of course have the red tide weekly monitoring from FWC, and unfortunately this is just from about a week ago. Red tide is back on the west coast, if you hadn't heard. That's unusual, but that's just a recent map I pulled. And all of this is becoming available. This is new, and this was not out there for the public really. This was, but these two were not. So, Mark, Jackie, myself, were with the governor about 2 weeks ago, I believe, and Florida also launched a new water quality website, and I think what they're going to try to do, if I get the gist of this, is they're going to try to start integrating all these different data sources and websites that are out there into one clearinghouse where you can find all this information, which they need to do, because you shouldn't have to search and try to find this stuff. It should be in one place. So as far as I know, once this website really gets going, protectingfloridatogether.gov, it'll be a resource the public can go to find all this stuff instead of looking for all these different things. So again, it's progress. Hopefully it'll turn out well. What is Harbor Branch doing? We established what's called the Florida Center for Coastal and Human Health through an initial donation or grant from the Harbor Branch Foundation. And what we're doing is using the expertise we have at FAU and Harbor Branch and our strategic research partners. We're looking at all the HABs, not just blue-green algae or red tide, trying to understand them. Really trying to understand what the population health impacts are, and then getting to a point that we have a healthy environment and population. So we're starting to recruit a lot of stakeholders and strategic partners. We're working pretty much with all these groups now. Funding is very limited still for algal bloom research, so we can't afford to duplicate effort. We're trying to leverage what we do as best we can. And Harbor Branch is also conducting a lot of critical research. We are testing people for exposure to toxins, so hopefully we can make that connection to health if there is an effect. We're using remote sensing assets to monitor the water around the state. We also have the Indian River Lagoon Observatory to monitor our water very closely in the lagoon. We're doing a lot of harmful algal bloom monitoring and toxin screening in the lagoon and up and down through the lagoon. We're also looking at how those toxins are getting into the food chain, how they get into fish, how they get into dolphins, and things like that. So we're trying as best we can. And ultimately, the center will work like this. We'll bring in our observations, our sentinel species, and our biological indicators, remote sensing assets, water quality monitoring, human health studies will all feed into the center, which will then output better modeling, prediction, risk assessment for populations about what's your exposure going to do to you. Get it out to our science and public stakeholders.